The vastness of space was silent, its endless void stretching out into eternity, untouched by the hands of time. For centuries, humanity had been exiled, forced to wander the dark edges of the galaxy after being cast out by the very civilizations they had once called allies. Earth, their cradle, their birthplace, had been left behind, abandoned and forgotten. Now, humanity was scattered, broken and alone, yet still holding onto the spark of hope that they could one day reclaim what was taken from them. Captain Cade stood at the bridge of the starship Revenant, staring into the inky blackness of space. His crew, a motley collection of the few surviving humans, worked silently around him. Their faces were tense, their expressions etched with the knowledge that every moment they spent in this cold, unforgiving expanse could be their last. The Revenant was not a warship. It was an old transport vessel, refitted for stealth and speed. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. And it was enough to keep them hidden, for now. In the distance, the faint glow of a dying star was the only light to be seen, a beacon of warmth in the emptiness. But it wasn't just any star. It was a star that held the key to humanity's survival. Somewhere deep within its remnants lay a forgotten secret, an artifact so powerful that whoever controlled it could change the course of the galaxy. The Galactic Order, the ruthless empire that had banished humanity, had long sought to uncover it, but they hadn't found it. Yet. Cade gripped the railing as the Revenant drifted closer to the star system. His heart raced. The mission they were on was dangerous, perhaps even suicidal. They had no way of knowing what lay ahead. The artifact was buried beneath the ashes of a once thriving planet, a world that had been consumed by the very forces that now hunted humanity. But it was the only hope they had left. If the Resistance could find the artifact, they could finally strike back against the Council that had long ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. Captain Ilara, his second-in-command, called from behind him. Her voice was calm, but Cade could hear the uncertainty in it. She had been with him through every mission, every battle, but this one felt different. She knew the stakes. "We're approaching the coordinates. Are you sure this is the right decision?" Cade turned, his eyes locking with hers. He could see the worry in her expression, the fear of what might be waiting for them. But he also saw something else, something far more important: determination. She was just as committed to the cause as he was. "There's no other choice," he said softly, his voice steady despite the turmoil swirling within him. "If we don't find the artifact, humanity is finished. The Council will wipe us out, just like they did to the others." Ilara nodded, but there was a brief moment of silence as the weight of their situation settled over them. This was it. There would be no turning back. They had already crossed the point of no return. Either they would find what they were searching for, or they would die trying. The Revenant slipped past the last of the debris surrounding the dead planet. It was a graveyard of forgotten ships and shattered space stations, remnants of battles fought and lost long ago. No one came here anymore, not the Galactic Order, not the pirates, not even the scavengers. It was a place that time had swallowed whole, a place where humanity's last hope could be found. "We're almost there," Royce, the ship's engineer, announced from the control panel. Her voice was laced with tension, but her hands were steady as she worked. "Prepare for landing. We'll have to go in on foot from here." The ship's engines hummed low as Cade turned back to the viewport. The planet below was a barren wasteland, its surface cracked and scarred from the cataclysmic events that had consumed it. There was no life, no civilization left. It was just a shell now. But somewhere beneath that shell, buried deep in the ruins, lay the artifact they needed. It was humanity's last chance. "Let's move," Cade ordered, his voice firm, and the crew moved into action. The Revenant touched down on the cracked surface of the planet with a soft thud. The landing bay doors slid open, and the harsh, dusty winds of the planet rushed in. It was a dry, desolate world, the air thin and unbreathable without their suits. The crew quickly donned their helmets, securing their gear as they prepared for what lay ahead. Cade stepped down onto the planet's surface first, his boots crunching on the dust and gravel. The landscape was bleak. Nothing but jagged rocks and ruins stretching as far as the eye could see. He had read the reports, studied the maps, but nothing could have prepared him for the eerie emptiness of this place. There were no signs of life here, no sign of anything that had once lived on this world. It felt as though the planet itself had given up. "We should split up," Ilara suggested. "The ruins are vast. We need to cover as much ground as possible." Cade nodded. "Keep in contact. If anything happens, we'll regroup here." With that, the crew spread out, moving cautiously through the rubble. Every step felt heavy, as though the planet itself was watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their boots crunching over the dead earth. They reached the edge of a large crater, its jagged walls broken and uneven. In the center of the crater, barely visible beneath the dust and debris, was a massive structure, something ancient, older than anything Cade had ever seen. It was a forgotten temple, its stone walls covered in strange markings, symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint light. This was the place. Cade felt a chill run down his spine as he approached the entrance. The markings on the walls were unmistakably human, though he could not understand their meaning. The door to the temple was cracked open, as though it had been waiting for them all this time. "We found it," Ilara said, her voice low as she joined him. "This is it. The artifact is inside." Cade nodded, his heart pounding. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment that would determine the fate of humanity. He stepped forward, entering the temple, his eyes scanning the dark interior. The air was thick with dust, and the silence seemed to press in on them from all sides. As they moved deeper into the temple, Cade felt a strange sense of unease. It was as though the very walls of the structure were alive, watching them, waiting for them to disturb the ancient secrets hidden within. They passed through long hallways, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors, until they reached the heart of the temple. There, sitting atop a stone pedestal, was the artifact. It was a small, crystalline object, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. It hummed with energy, as though it was alive, pulsing in time with Cade's heartbeat. The artifact was beautiful, yet terrifying. Cade could feel its power radiating from it, a power that could either save or destroy them all. "We found it," Cade whispered, his voice barely audible in the stillness. "This is the key." But before they could take another step, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The temple's walls cracked, and a deep, rumbling sound filled the air. Something was coming. Something was awake. And in that moment, Cade knew that their journey was far from over. The artifact had been waiting for them, but so had something else. Something far older, far more dangerous. The battle for humanity's future was just beginning. The ground shook again, harder this time. Cade instinctively reached for the weapon at his side, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his blade. The air was thick with tension, the stillness of the temple now replaced by an almost oppressive sense of danger. He could feel it, the ancient power of the artifact, but also something else, something dark and restless that seemed to be stirring beneath the surface. "Ilara," Cade called, his voice cutting through the silence as his second-in-command approached. "Get ready. We're not alone." The walls around them seemed to groan, the sound echoing through the hollow corridors like the moaning of an old beast awakening from a long slumber. Ilara drew her blaster, her eyes scanning the shadows, looking for the source of the disturbance. Her stance was tense, alert. She had been in countless dangerous situations, but this was different. There was something unnatural about this place, something ancient and forgotten. As Cade took a cautious step forward, a flicker of movement caught his eye. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to shift, coiling and twisting like smoke. Without warning, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was humanoid, but its features were obscured by the dim light, and the strange markings that covered its body. Its skin was an unnatural shade of gray, its eyes glowing with a strange otherworldly light. The creature's presence sent a chill down Cade's spine. This wasn't just some ancient guardian. It was something far more dangerous. "Who are you?" Cade demanded, his voice steady but filled with unease. He raised his weapon, ready for whatever the creature might do. The creature said nothing. It only watched them with its glowing eyes, unblinking and unyielding. Then, without warning, it raised one hand, and the ground trembled again, this time with a violent force. The air crackled with energy, and a blast of energy shot from the creature's hand, slamming into the stone wall beside Cade and Ilara. The impact sent debris flying, but miraculously, they were unharmed. "What in the stars?" Ilara muttered, her hand still gripping her blaster. "That thing's not human." Cade's mind raced. What was this creature? Was it connected to the artifact they had come to find? It seemed to be guarding it, but why? Who, or what, had placed it here? Another blast of energy rippled from the creature, this time aimed directly at Cade. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack, but the blast shattered the stone floor where he had just been standing. Ilara fired back, but her shots seemed to do little more than annoy the creature. Its glowing eyes flickered with an almost amused glint, as if it were toying with them. "We need to get to the artifact," Cade shouted, trying to maintain focus. "It's the key to everything. We can't let it fall into the wrong hands." But as they advanced toward the pedestal where the artifact sat, the creature moved with blinding speed, blocking their path. It raised both hands now, and the air around them thickened, the energy in the room building to a fever pitch. Cade's heart raced. They were outmatched. No amount of firepower would defeat this creature. They needed a plan, and fast. The artifact was their only chance, but they couldn't get close enough to it without dealing with the Guardian. "Cover me," Cade barked, motioning toward Ilara. Without waiting for a response, he charged toward the creature, his blade drawn and ready. His muscles screamed in protest, but he pushed through, the weight of humanity's survival pressing down on him. The creature responded with another wave of energy, but Cade was ready this time. He twisted, dodging the blast, and leaped toward the pedestal. As he neared it, a surge of energy from the artifact itself flared to life, blindingly bright. Cade felt his heart skip a beat. The artifact was responding to him. The creature let out an inhuman screech, but it was too late. The energy from the artifact exploded outward, a shockwave of raw power that sent the creature crashing back into the wall. Cade barely managed to hold onto the pedestal, the surge of power nearly knocking him off his feet. As the dust settled, the creature lay motionless on the floor, its form twisted and contorted. It wasn't dead, but it was clearly incapacitated, at least for now. Cade stood, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he approached the artifact. His hand shook as he reached out to touch it. For a brief moment, it felt as though the world around him was holding its breath. The artifact's energy thrummed beneath his fingertips, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. "Ilara, come on," Cade shouted, his voice strained. "We have what we came for. We need to get out of here." Ilara rushed forward, keeping an eye on the creature as she moved to Cade's side. "We don't know what this thing can do," she said, her voice tense. "We're not out of danger yet." Cade nodded grimly, but he didn't take his eyes off the artifact. He had no idea what they had just unleashed, but one thing was certain. The power of this object was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It could change everything. With a sharp pull, Cade lifted the artifact from its pedestal. The moment it left the stone base, the temple began to shake violently, as if the very foundation of the structure were crumbling. The air was thick with energy, and Cade could feel it pulling at him, like the artifact itself was trying to escape his grasp. "We need to move now," Ilara shouted, her voice strained as the walls around them began to crack and fall apart. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and chunks of stone rained down around them. They turned and bolted toward the exit, the sound of crashing stone echoing behind them. The creature, still alive, but weakened, was slowly regaining its footing. They didn't have much time. As they made their way back through the ruined halls, the entire temple seemed to be collapsing around them. The walls cracked and groaned, as though the structure was alive and fighting to keep its secrets hidden. Cade and Ilara ran harder, their footsteps pounding in the chaos. They finally burst through the entrance and into the open air. The Revenant was still waiting for them, its engines humming softly in the distance, but there was no time to relax. The sky above was filled with the distant hum of enemy ships, distant but coming closer. The hunt was far from over. The Galactic Order would soon be on them, and they had no idea what kind of force they were facing. But Cade knew one thing for sure: humanity's fight for survival had just begun. As they reached the ship, Cade looked down at the artifact in his hands. Its glow had dimmed, but its power was undeniable. It was more than just a weapon. It was a message, a promise. Humanity had been forgotten, cast aside like a shadow. But now they had the means to return. The galaxy would learn soon enough that the people they had cast out were not gone forever. Humanity was coming back, and nothing, not the Council, not the ancient Guardians, not even time itself, could stop them. They had found the key to their future, and the galaxy would tremble. The Revenant lifted off the ground with a soft hum, the harsh wind of the barren planet's surface howling as the ship's engines roared to life. Cade gripped the artifact tightly, his mind racing. The encounter with the Guardian had left him shaken, but he knew that what they had just uncovered was far too important to dwell on the dangers they'd faced. They had only scratched the surface of what this artifact could do. And yet, even as the Revenant shot into the stars, a deep unease settled over him. Ilara was already at the helm, her fingers flying across the controls. Her focus was intense, but even she couldn't hide the subtle tension in her shoulders. The crew had made it out of the temple alive, but the artifact's power was still a mystery. It felt like the calm before the storm. The ship sailed through the void of space, heading toward the last known safe haven of the human resistance, a hidden base far beyond the reach of the Galactic Order's surveillance. It was the only place they could safely analyze what they had uncovered. "Captain, we've got company." Royce's voice crackled over the comm system, breaking the silence. "Two ships. They're not ours, and they're closing in fast." Cade's heart skipped a beat. His hand instinctively gripped the artifact tighter. The Revenant wasn't equipped for battle, not in the way a true warship would be. They were sitting ducks in open space, but they couldn't outrun the approaching ships either. The galaxy was about to know they were alive. And with that, the hunt was on. "Can you identify them?" Cade asked, his voice tight. "They've got markings," Royce replied. "Definitely Council ships. We're not dealing with scouts anymore, Captain. These are full-sized warships." Cade's thoughts raced as he looked out of the ship's viewport. Far in the distance, two massive silhouettes loomed, their shapes almost blending into the blackness of space. They were too far to engage right now, but the moment they drew closer, the Revenant would be sitting in the middle of an intergalactic war zone. "Ilara, increase speed. Try to make it to the asteroid field ahead of us. We can use the terrain to our advantage." "On it," she responded without hesitation, her fingers quickly adjusting the ship's trajectory. The stars outside the viewport shifted as the ship veered toward the dense asteroid belt, but Cade knew they wouldn't make it out of there easily. The ships following them were not only faster, they were far better equipped for combat. Minutes ticked by in tense silence as the Revenant raced toward the asteroid field. Cade stood up from his seat, walking over to the crew, his hand still clutching the artifact. He glanced at Ilara, then Royce, and the rest of the crew. They were all waiting, uncertain about what came next. "What do we know about the artifact?" Cade asked, his voice low but firm. "What's its real power? We've barely scratched the surface, And now we've got the entire fleet of the Council coming after us. Ilara's eyes flicked toward the artifact in Cade's hand. We don't know much yet. What we do know is that it's not just some weapon. It's tied to humanity's history. A weapon, yes, but also something more. Something far older than we realized. It's linked to the first human empire, one that the Council wiped out centuries ago. If they know what this thing can do, they'll stop at nothing to get their hands on it. A dark thought crossed Cade's mind. Do you think the Council knows it's humanity's legacy? Ilara's gaze hardened. They must. There's no way they wouldn't recognize it. We're not the only ones who've been searching for this artifact. The Council's been hunting it for years, maybe even longer. Suddenly, Royce's voice crackled through the comms, interrupting their conversation. They're closing in, Captain. We don't have much time. Cade's jaw tightened. He turned to Ilara. Get us into the asteroid field. Fast. The Revenant plunged into the asteroid field, the ship jerking as it dodged massive rocks, some as big as a city block. Cade gripped the side of the ship's wall to steady himself. Every bump sent shockwaves through the hull, and the stars outside the viewport blurred as Ilara skillfully navigated the maze of asteroids. But the enemy ships were close behind, their powerful engines cutting through the darkness like sharks in search of prey. One of the ships fired a warning shot, the blast lighting up the surrounding asteroids like a firework display. The shot missed by mere inches, but served as a reminder of just how close they were to being caught. Captain, Ilara called, her voice tinged with worry. The asteroid field's only going to buy us a few minutes. They've got longer range weapons. If we don't come up with something quick, we're not going to make it. Cade's mind raced. There had to be a way to make this work. They couldn't fight these ships. They didn't have the firepower. But they could make them chase them into a trap. If he could lure the enemy ships towards something that would give them an advantage, they might stand a chance. We're going to need to make a jump, Cade said, his voice determined. Not to a standard warp point, something more unpredictable. We're going to use the asteroid field to mask our jump, and then we'll disappear into deep space. But that's risky, Royce cautioned. We're talking about making a blind jump. If we don't hit the right coordinates, we won't have a choice, Cade interrupted. We can't outrun them. This is our only chance. Cade turned toward Ilara, his face hardening with resolve. Do it. Ilara didn't hesitate. Her hands flew over the console, punching in the coordinates for a location in the deep, uncharted corners of space. It was a long shot, a gamble, but it was the only way out. The enemy ships fired again, but the Revenant was already speeding through the asteroid field, dodging rocks at breakneck speed. The closer they got to the edge of the field, the more intense the pursuit became. But then Ilara's voice rang out, clear and steady. Engaging jump sequence. For a brief moment, everything went still. The ship's engines roared as Ilara pushed the Revenant to the edge of its limits. The asteroids outside the viewport seemed to freeze in place as if time itself held its breath. Then, with a final burst of energy, the ship shot forward, disappearing into the blackness of space. The jump was disorienting, a feeling of weightlessness that made Cade's stomach lurch. The ship trembled violently as it traveled through the unknown, and for a moment, Cade couldn't tell if they had made it or if they were lost forever in the deep reaches of space. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the jump ended. The ship lurched again, and the stars outside the viewport flickered back into view. Cade took a deep breath, his heart still pounding. We're clear, Ilara said, her voice a mixture of relief and exhaustion. We've made it. Cade exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the silent expanse of space. The Revenant had escaped, but for how long? The Council would eventually catch up, and when they did, the battle for humanity's future would begin in earnest. He looked down at the artifact in his hands, its faint glow still pulsing with mysterious energy. Whatever lay ahead, one thing was certain. Humanity was no longer a forgotten species. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they would fight to reclaim their place in the galaxy. And nothing, not even the full might of the Galactic Council, would stand in their way. The Revenant drifted through the cold expanse of space, silent and still. The asteroid field was far behind them, and the stars around them shone with a distant, indifferent light. Cade stood at the viewport, staring out into the abyss. His mind was heavy with the weight of their recent escape, and the knowledge that it wouldn't last. They had made it this far, but it was only a matter of time before the Council found them again. They always found their targets. "Captain," Ilara's voice broke the silence. "I've been running scans on the artifact. There's something off about it." Cade turned, his gaze narrowing. "Off? What do you mean?" Ilara tapped a few controls on the console, and a holographic image of the artifact appeared in the center of the room. Its shape was unremarkable at first glance, just a dark, metallic cube with intricate markings etched into its surface. But as the light from the console flickered across it, something more sinister seemed to emerge. Something about the energy signatures it's emitting. It's fluctuating, almost like it's reacting to the ship's systems. It's never done that before. Ilara's expression was one of deep concern. It's almost like it's alive. Cade stepped closer, his eyes scanning the glowing hologram. The artifact had been dormant for centuries, hidden away in the ruins of forgotten temples. They had been told it was a weapon, a relic of an ancient human empire that had been lost to time. But there was more to it than that. Something deeper, something far more dangerous than just a weapon. They could feel it. Cade, Ilara, even the crew, like a faint pulse in the air, a beckoning that was hard to ignore. "We don't fully understand what it does yet," Cade said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of what they'd unleashed. "But we can't let the Council get their hands on it. Not now." Ilara nodded, her fingers still dancing over the controls. "I'm trying to suppress the readings, but the artifact seems to be interfering with our systems. It's unstable." Before Cade could respond, the ship's alarms blared, cutting through the tension. His heart skipped a beat. The deep calm of space had turned into a vacuum of fear, a certainty that their brief reprieve was over. "Enemy ships detected." Royce's voice rang out over the comm system, calm but urgent. "They're here. And this time, they're not alone." Cade's eyes widened. 2, no, 3 ships, much larger than the ones they had previously encountered, were now visible on the radar. The Council had sent reinforcements. The hunt was on. "Can we outrun them?" Cade asked, already moving toward the command deck. Ilara's hands moved quickly, adjusting the course of the ship. "Not this time. These ships are too fast. The Revenant can't take another chase like before. If we run, we'll be sitting ducks." Cade's eyes flicked to the artifact. It was still glowing faintly, pulsating with strange energy. His mind raced. If they couldn't outrun them, they needed another option. Something more drastic. "There's one place we might be able to hide," Cade muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "The rift." "The rift?" Ilara echoed, her voice skeptical. "That's a myth. No one's ever made it out of there alive." "I don't care," Cade said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at the back of his mind. "It's our only chance. Set course for the rift. Full speed." "But the coordinates are unstable," Ilara warned. "If we make a mistake, we'll be lost in the void. There's no coming back." Cade turned to face her, his eyes hard with determination. "We don't have a choice." Ilara didn't argue. She quickly punched in the coordinates, and the Revenant lurched forward. The ships in pursuit followed them closely, their weapons charging. They didn't have much time. The rift was a dangerous stretch of space, unpredictable, deadly. But it was also the one place the Council wouldn't risk pursuing them. The area was known for its unstable space-time anomalies. If they could navigate through it, they might lose the enemy ships. The Revenant surged forward, engines pushing to their limits as they dove into the rift. The ship jerked and groaned, and the stars outside the viewport twisted into streaks of light. The deeper they went, the more intense the fluctuations became. Space itself seemed to warp around them. Ilara's hands were shaking as she fought to keep the ship on course. "This is insane," she muttered, her voice tight with fear. "The rift isn't just dangerous. It's a trap for ships like ours. One wrong move, and we'll—" But before she could finish, the ship shuddered violently. Cade felt his stomach lurch as the rift began to tug at them, pulling the Revenant deeper into its chaotic heart. They were no longer in control. The rift had them. The ship was jolted in all directions, the alarms blaring as systems flickered on and off. Cade's mind raced as he watched the viewport. The stars outside now looked like swirling rivers of light, distorting into strange, geometric shapes. It was as if the very fabric of space and time was tearing itself apart. "Brace for impact," Ilara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. But the warning came too late. The ship was thrown violently, sending Cade crashing into the bulkhead. He heard Ilara's voice, but it was distant, fading. The artifact in his hands vibrated intensely, almost as if it were reacting to the pull of the rift itself. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the turbulence stopped. Cade groaned as he pushed himself off the floor, his head spinning. He looked around. Everything was silent. The ship had stopped shaking. The alarms had ceased, but something was wrong. The air was thick with an unsettling energy. He stumbled toward the viewport. Where once there had been the familiar sight of stars, now there was only nothing. An infinite void. An emptiness so vast that it seemed to stretch forever. The ship was surrounded by nothingness. No stars, no planets, no light. Just an endless, oppressive dark. "What the hell is this?" Ilara whispered, her voice barely audible. Cade could barely breathe. He was starting to realize that they had entered a place that no one was meant to find. The rift wasn't just a phenomenon. It was a doorway, a place between worlds, between dimensions. And now they were trapped here, with no way to return. The artifact in his hands began to glow brighter. The energy was stronger now, as if the artifact was reacting to the void around them. Cade could feel it in his bones. The power of it was unlike anything he'd ever felt before. "What's happening?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling. Cade couldn't answer. He was too focused on the artifact. It was as if it were calling to something beyond this reality. He could feel it in the air, the hum of something ancient, something primal. The power of humanity, long lost, was awakening. And as the void around them seemed to shift, Cade realized with a chilling certainty, they weren't just lost in space. They had stepped into something far worse. They had stumbled upon the edge of reality itself. The void outside the Revenant stretched infinitely, a vast emptiness where the stars no longer dared to shine. Cade stood motionless, his eyes glued to the viewport, the artifact still humming in his hands. Every instinct told him that they had crossed into something that shouldn't exist, a place beyond the known universe. This wasn't just a rift in space. This was something older, more dangerous, a place outside of time itself. "Ilara, can you get us out of here?" Cade's voice was tight, almost a whisper, as if speaking louder might somehow make their situation worse. Ilara's hands trembled on the controls. She was trying to bring the Revenant back online, but the instruments before her flickered unstable. I don't know. The ship's systems are fried. It's like we're not even in normal space anymore. I can't." Her words were cut off by the artifact in Cade's hands. It glowed brighter, the energy pulsing in waves, vibrating in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. Cade felt a strange pull toward it, as if the artifact were calling him, drawing him deeper into its power. "Captain, we need to understand it," Ilara said, her voice strained. "This thing, it's the key. It's the only way we'll get out of this." Cade looked at her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean, the key?" "I don't know," Ilara replied, her hands still shaking as she tried to stabilize the ship. "But something about this artifact is tied to the very fabric of this place. I think it's connected to whatever created the rift. Maybe it can leave us out." But even as she said it, Cade's unease deepened. The pull of the artifact was growing stronger, more insistent. It wasn't just affecting the ship now, it was affecting him too. He could feel its power coursing through his veins, calling to him. The more he resisted, the stronger it became. He could hear it in his mind, whispering to him in a language he couldn't understand, urging him to let go. For a moment, everything felt wrong. The ship was suspended in this strange space, and the edges of his vision began to blur. It was as if the universe itself was bending, warping around the Revenant. The stars outside swirled like liquid in a vortex, and the ship shuddered violently as though it were caught in a storm. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a voice, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very core of the ship. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense, more like a presence, a consciousness reaching out from beyond. Cade felt it reverberating in his bones, in his mind. The voice wasn't speaking to him directly, but somehow he understood. "You are not meant to be here, human." The voice was not malevolent, but it was unyielding. There was a certain finality in its tone, as though it was speaking from the heart of eternity itself. Cade's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped back, instinctively clutching the artifact tighter. The pull of its energy was now overwhelming, but the voice seemed to push back, trying to keep them away. "This place was never meant for you." The voice reverberated again, sending a wave of pressure through the Revenant. Ilara looked up, her face pale. "What is that? What's happening?" Cade struggled to speak, but his voice felt lost in the weight of the presence that surrounded them. The ship seemed to be resonating with the same frequency, as if it too were trying to communicate with whatever ancient force was speaking to them. "You must leave." The voice now carried an edge of urgency, a tremor that sent a chill down Cade's spine. "Return to where you belong, or you will be lost forever." Cade's mind raced. He didn't know who or what was speaking, but it was clear that this place, this rift, was not a space they could survive in for long. If they stayed here, they would be trapped, lost, perhaps forever. And the artifact was the key to their escape. That much he understood. The artifact's energy was somehow bound to this place, and whatever force this was, it didn't want them here. But even as he began to back away from the viewport, something deep within him rebelled. The voice had warned them, but it hadn't told them what would happen if they didn't leave. What if staying meant unlocking something more, something greater than they could ever imagine? The presence in the void grew louder, more insistent. It was as though the very fabric of space itself was closing in on them, squeezing tighter with every passing moment. The artifact began to pulse faster, almost as if it were responding to the pressure. "Captain," Ilara's voice broke through the chaos. "We need to get out of here now. The ship's systems are failing. The rift is collapsing." Cade's eyes flicked toward her. He could feel the pressure in the air, the sudden shift in the ship's systems. The Revenant was being pulled deeper into the rift, its hull groaning under the strain. They were no longer just floating in an empty void. Something was pulling them down into the heart of this place, and it wasn't just the rift itself. It was something far more ancient and dangerous. "We can't leave." Cade's voice was hoarse as he glanced at the artifact once more. "The artifact. It's our only way out. It's what we've been looking for." Ilara shook her head. "The artifact is what brought us here, Cade. It's unstable. We can't risk." But before she could finish, the ship lurched violently, throwing them both off balance. Alarms blared as the systems began to overload. Sparks flew from the console, and the lights flickered, plunging the ship into darkness before the emergency lights kicked in. The pressure around them intensified, the force field outside distorting, bending. The stars outside were now a blur of color, shifting from one dimension to another. The walls of the ship groaned under the strain, the metal protesting, as though the very structure were being torn apart. Then, suddenly, it stopped. A silence like no other filled the space. Cade stood, breathless, in the heart of the ship. His head was spinning, and for a moment, he thought he had lost all sense of time. The lights flickered back on, and the hum of the ship's systems slowly returned to normal. But the stars outside had changed. The rift was still there, but something was different. The stars outside weren't just swirling, they were now aligned in a strange pattern, as if they were pointing to something specific. It was as if they had crossed into another reality, another dimension entirely. "Ilara, look." Cade's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of discovery. "We're somewhere else." Ilara leaned forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Where are we?" Cade's heart raced. The artifact was still glowing softly in his hands, but now it felt calmer, as if its power had settled into something more controlled. "I think we've found it. This is what we were meant to discover." The ancient human empire was not just lost to time. It was hidden, here, in this place, beyond the rift. "We found the truth." The artifact hummed once more, and this time, Cade understood. The artifact had been guiding them all along. They had not merely stumbled into this place. They had been chosen, drawn here for a reason. This was where humanity's past, its true legacy, had been sealed away. And now, they were the ones who would awaken it. As the stars outside began to align, Cade knew one thing for certain. The Revenant had crossed into something far bigger than they could have ever imagined. And whatever was coming next, they would be ready for it. The true war for humanity's place in the galaxy was about to begin.